Our top story this hour: in Sri Lanka, protesters stormed the presidential official residence in Colombo as the country's economic crisis deepens. The whereabouts of President Rajapaksa are unknown. Let's bring you some new pictures which have just been filed. They show the protesters inside the official residence. Police fired tear gas in an effort to disperse huge crowds gathered to demand the resignation of President Rajapaksa. These scenes are, well, it's too tempting, isn't it, really? You go inside the home of somebody who's so wealthy, a political and symbolic figure. You're not going to resist the temptation to jump in and revel in what you are currently enjoying, but it's a symbol, if you like, of the gap between the wealthiest in Sri Lanka and, at the moment, everybody else, because as we're hearing from our guest in the last hour, he's from a relatively affluent background. He runs a business organisation. He's not part of the country who you would effectively be most directly affected, and yet fuel, gas, all those things can't be got by anybody who's got money or hasn't got money. There's a shortage of foreign currency. In fact, the central bank has run out of it, which means it can't buy goods on the international market, and it imports a lot of things like food. Well, earlier our South Asia editor Ambarasan Etharajan gave us an update and tried to explain some of the background to this development.
Huge crowds gathered outside the president's compound demanding his resignation. They had travelled from across the country to join the demonstration, which went ahead despite the authorities attempting to impose a curfew. Troops fired into the air and used tear gas to try to hold people back, but they broke through the barricades. It's the latest demonstration caused by Sri Lanka's worst economic crisis in decades. The country is suffering rampant inflation and struggling to import food, fuel and medicine. Following the latest developments, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has summoned an emergency meeting of political party leaders to discuss the current situation. Sri Lanka is facing a crippling shortage of foreign currency reserves. Yesterday, the UN urged both the authorities and the protesters to show restraint and make sure the rally was peaceful. The continuing economic hardship has forced the people to rally against the government once again.
Let's talk now to Fidel Fernando, who joins us from Galle in Sri Lanka. Fidel, the official verdict is that the president left before the crowds arrived. Whether he left before or after is almost academic, because, I mean, effectively, he'd still be in the presidential palace if it wasn't being stormed. So, I mean, it's a symbolic act, isn't it, that shows really how the political class has lost control of Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. I think it feels like a revolutionary day here. And the storming of the presidential palace is... I don't think anybody expected to find the president there. People already knew that he wouldn't be there, but it is very much a symbolic act. And it's something that there's been months of lead up to this. It hasn't just happened overnight. People have been agitating for his removal since, in widespread protests since February and March. It's been as concerted an effort and as widespread a kind of people's movement as has ever been seen in Sri Lanka. And there are all sorts of rumors flying around, whether he's left, whether he's not left. There's rumors that he, in a convoy, went to the international airport and is preparing to leave. There were other rumors during the day that he was boarding a ship. Either way, he has not been seen today. He has not been heard from at all. And people who feel completely cut off and who feel as if Sri Lanka's current political class do not hear them, that there is a massive gap between the people and the political elite, today have taken over not just the palace, but they also stormed the presidential secretariat, outside which they had been protesting for months. An Occupy movement has been going on there for a long time. And to take over those places, and it hasn't been violent on the protesters' side, yes. Although there was tear gas used at some points. Protesters have been largely peaceful, through the course of this, and I'm talking going back several months. So to take those over does feel like a significant moment. We still haven't got a resignation from either the president or the prime minister, though. So that is what people are still agitating for.
Sri Lanka has a very noble democratic tradition. It's a country that has very lively politics, but it's kind of enthusiastic in its support for accountable government. This government has clearly failed on the accountability side of the equation, and has also failed on the basics to deliver food and fuel and affordability. But it leaves a vacuum, doesn't it? That presumably was the biggest worry, not just for many in Sri Lanka, but also for people, let's say, watching in Delhi. They're going to be watching presumably and saying, Sri Lanka's a really important country. It's now in a crisis that's so big that it could destroy itself if it doesn't get the support and help it needs to do the most basic things like feed its people.
Absolutely, and there's an ongoing IMF negotiation currently underway between the Sri Lankan government and the IMF. IMF bailout is being discussed, and debt restructuring, which Sri Lanka desperately needs that process to succeed and to give Sri Lanka a good deal out of that. However, you also have a presidency and a prime ministership that has lost all legitimacy. There is no legitimacy in those places of power right now, and people do not trust.
Fidel, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to let people know the pictures we're seeing are actually from Gaul, where you are, and they underline the point about whether people are on motorbikes or on foot, or bicycle, more likely at the moment because of fuel. These are peaceful protests. This is not violent. It's not irrational rage. It's very, very calm anger about the fact that people have not been able to eat and keep themselves warm and all the rest of it for weeks now.
Yeah, absolutely. In Gaul, where I've been in the protesting crowds all day, there are infants there are infants, there are school children, there's elderly Sri Lankans, all gamut of kind of Sri Lankans being represented there. And what's been particularly encouraging is this kind of repudiation of the majoritarian politics that the Rajapaksas in particular have kind of visited upon the island, and kind of a realization that is no longer the way that Sri Lanka wants to do things. The chants just outside, I don't know if you can hear them, the chants just outside that are happening, they're just as much against the idea of being divided by race and ethnicity and by religion. There are Buddhist monks out there, there are Catholic priests, there are nuns, there are Hindu swamis. Everybody is being represented at these protests today. And despite their enormous size, and despite, it feels like the whole country is out on the streets today, they have been incredibly peaceful. There are little kind of pockets of kind of small violence that have happened, but there has not been anything substantial.
Fidel Fernando, really great to speak to you. Thank you so much for your reportage. I'm sure we're going to speak again during the course of this weekend. For now, thanks very much.